Okay, our second panel consists of Lieutenant General Charles Petty, if I'm pronouncing that right. No? Petey. He's the Judge Advocate General for the U.S. Army, Vice Admiral John Hannock, the Judge Advocate General for the U.S. Navy, and Lieutenant General Jeffrey Rockwell, the Judge Advocate General for the Air Force. And then Major General Daniel Lecce,
ma'am.
Lecce, Staff Judge Advocate to the Commandant of the Marine Corps. All right, Mr. Petey, would you like to begin?
And members of the committee, thank you. We have the best Army in the world because of commanders, not in spite of them. Our Army is the most effective force on the battlefield because our commanders and our soldiers are the product of a justice system that for 243 years has rested in the hands of those who fight and win our wars, commanders. I have worked for over 15 years of my professional life, often directly with this committee, confronting sexual assault, especially with the tectonic changes to Article 120 in 2007. I was personally involved in Secretary Garen's efforts to resource this fight and had a direct hand in the establishment of our Special Victim Prosecution Program, as well as the Special Victim Counsel Program. I therefore thank this committee for its continued commitment and leadership on this issue. I appear before you recognizing there is still much work to do. While I disagree with the characterization of individual lapses as systemic failures, one omission or failure is too many. I recognize there is much the Army and the services can still do. As the Army Judge Advocate General, I tell you that we are relentless in getting after this problem, protecting victims, our communities, and of course the rights of those accused. In short, the commander has always been and will always be the fulcrum to any solution in the Army at every level of command. And so it is and must be with sexual assault. All of us in this room recognize there is no easy solution. I've been fighting this crime hand in hand with commanders for 31 years, but certainly no solution excludes military commanders. In singling out the supposed 1% who convene general courts suggesting these are the only ones affected by the proposed legislation fundamentally misses the point about command authority and the sublime relationship between the leader and the led. Look at our current housing crisis. We outsourced responsibility for housing our soldiers. Who do our families look to for solutions? Who do you look to drive change? Soldiers look to their commanders. Every town hall is hosted by a commander. This is because there is no set of leaders on this earth better trained, better educated, resourced, and more consistently successful than the American commander. The notion that stripping commanders of authority over serious crimes will reduce crime, result in more or better prosecutions, or higher conviction rates is simply not supported by any empirical evidence. Indeed, the proposition, in my view, is actually disproved by the empirical evidence. We know this. In the multitude of congressionally mandated studies, where diverse panels of experts have exhaustively examined the military justice system, hearing from hundreds of witnesses who gave thousands of hours of testimony, they reported back to you one critical, consistent conclusion: the commander should not be removed from the justice system. In fact, the DAC-IPAD's third annual report issued just last week that has been referenced determined that in 95% of the cases reviewed, commanders acted correctly in charging decisions. They found, and I quote, no systemic problem with command decision-making regarding preferral of charges for penetrative sexual assaults. I'm often told in response, General Petey, you haven't moved the needle and it's getting worse. 10 years ago, sexual assault trials comprised 18% of trials in Army courtrooms. The needle, and my apologies, in 2018, that percentage is now 50%, 5-0. The needle has indeed moved, and this is because commanders at all levels have set priorities, established expectations, and have driven culture change. This is not a coincidence. The scope of sexual assault crisis in our society, in our Army, is as big as the society from which we draw our soldiers. As you know, our Army is refreshed every year with 70,000 new soldiers from every city in America, and we draw from that society and we face the common problems. A highly esteemed university recently released a study that showed 48% of their females experienced sexual assault during their time at the university. Within that 12-month period, 18 to 22% had reported an assault. I share these statistics not to place blame elsewhere or to distract from the 4.4% prevalence rate in the Army, but simply to reflect that it is a societal problem. And it's a demographic issue in many respects that we all own and have to address. Because we do. The Army owns this problem. Discipline is the soul of the Army, as George Washington said, and it still is. It's in our DNA. In my professional view, taking away a commander's decision over discipline, including the decision to prosecute and court-martial, will fundamentally compromise the readiness and lethality of our Army today and on the next battlefield. And let's remember, you're trying to give this authority to those sitting before you. 120 years of legal experience on this panel is saying our nation will regret it in the next battlefield. The Justice Act of 16 you passed fundamentally altered our justice system starting just 12 weeks ago. We spent the last 18 months training those changes. The changes only began 12 weeks ago. While I appreciate the desire to see change, with a criminal justice system, we must exercise some measure of strategic patience to ensure our changes have healthy consequences. Further, we cannot forget our obligations to those accused of crime. We each in this room have
already exceeded your time by a minute, so could you wrap up, please?
Yes, ma'am. We have a sacred obligation to protect those accused of crime as well, ma'am. And I fully acknowledge we are not perfect, but we are truly an accountable system. I thank your committee for the time, ma'am.
Thank you. Vice Admiral Hannock.
Madam Chair, Ranking Member Kelly, and members of the subcommittee, thanks for the chance to appear before you today. The testimony of the first panel reminds everyone of the importance of our efforts to reduce sexual assault with the goal of eliminating this crime from our ranks. April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and it's worthwhile to keep in mind that we all share this goal, even when there are multiple views on the precise steps that will help us get there. In my written statement, I outlined the role of the commander in the adjudication of sexual assault charges in the Navy. First, there is an independent investigation by the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, and then an independent prosecution merits review by Navy prosecutors. This information, the investigation, the prosecution merits review, along with input from the victim or victim's legal counsel, then goes to an 06 commander for a disposition decision. And if the case proceeds in the military justice system, there are further reviews involving both lawyers and commanders. These commanders are known as the Sexual Assault Initial Disposition Authority and the General Court-Martial Convening Authority. And I support the role these commanders have in making the initial disposition decision on charges and in referring cases to court-martial. My written statement also noted what I think are some threshold questions in considering whether to remove the role of the commander. Question 1, would removing commander's convening authority decrease the prevalence of sexual assault? Question 2, would it increase the reporting of sexual assault incidents? And question 3, would it improve case disposition decisions? Now, on the first two questions, whether a change would decrease the prevalence or increase the reporting of sexual assault, we have the benefit of the 2014 report of the Congressionally Directed Response Systems Panel. And after studying changes to the military justice system of our allies and hearing from many witnesses on both sides of the argument, this was the conclusion shared by 7 of the 9 panel members. Yet the evidence does not support a conclusion that removing convening authority from senior commanders will reduce the incidence of sexual assault or increase reporting of sexual assault. And today, when I speak with leadership of our Victims Legal Counsel program, their sense is similar. Based on their work, they don't think that the convening authority issue is a significant barrier to reporting. Now, on the third question, whether removal of convening authority would improve case disposition decisions, as mentioned before, we have the benefit of the recent report of the DAC IPAD. In its review of 164 sample cases, DGOVLIVE concluded that the disposition decision of commanders were reasonable in 95% of them. As noted before, the committee concluded that its review revealed no signs of systemic problems with the reasonableness of commanders' decisions on whether to prefer charges in cases involving a penetrative sexual assault. And I look forward to the report that the DGOVLIVE will submit next year in March 2020 that will extend its work to include the 2,000 investigative cases it is reviewing. I'm grateful for these studies that have been conducted. The military justice system might be the most studied criminal justice system over the past decade, and we welcome the scrutiny. That scrutiny benefits everyone who serves in the armed forces, those who are victims, those who are accused of crimes, and those who work within the system to achieve its objectives to be a system of justice and a system that enables commanders to maintain good order and discipline. I'm also grateful for the support of this subcommittee and the organizations represented by the first panel to ensure we continue to make improvements to our response systems and prevention efforts. Thank you again, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Kelly.
Next, thank you, Lieutenant General Rockwell.
Chair Spear, Ranking Member Kelly, distinguished members of the panel. Military commands led by commanders are responsible for executing our national defense strategy to defend the nation and win America's wars. Throughout our history, we have accomplished this because of four simple yet key components: the best training, the best equipment, the best people, and fourth, the most important element that binds together the other three: discipline. Discipline lies at the heart of command and control. Commanders command and control airmen armed with the best training and equipment to execute our national defense missions. Discipline is commanders' business, since they have the ultimate responsibility to build, maintain, and lead the disciplined force necessary to succeed in combat across multiple domains. Discipline makes us ready. Discipline makes us lethal. To build this disciplined force to execute these missions, the military justice system works to strike a careful constitutional balance between the competing equities in the justice process. That balance is best struck when, at every critical junction of the process, a commander is armed with the relevant facts, including victim input, and advised by a staff judge advocate before making a decision on the next critical step in the process. We also know that good order and discipline is best when command operates and executes discipline across the entire continuum of discipline, from prevention efforts in setting standards, duties, and command climate on the left side of that continuum, to the response of courts-martial on the right side when standards aren't met, and operating everywhere in between those 2 points. This disciplinary continuum embodies the concepts of unity of command, unity of effort, and command and control needed to build a ready, lethal, and disciplined force to execute the missions the nation asks of us. This committee and Congress have been instrumental in our efforts to improve military justice with regard to sexual assault. You have focused the system to be more fair and timely, to appropriately address allegations of misconduct that fosters progressive discipline designed to deter and rehabilitate wrongdoing, to respect the dignity of victims of crime, to protect the rights of the accused, and to maintain the trust of airmen and the American people. We have increased our commander training to ensure they are better prepared to exercise all of their authorities. Before taking command, all commanders receive extensive legal training so they fully understand their responsibilities under the code and the manual. Officers receive similar training at all levels of their professional military education, as do all enlisted members. Most importantly, as a matter of process, safeguards have been incorporated and gaps closed to maximize legal advice during every key phase or decision point of a case, through investigation, adjudication, and final disposition. The existing authority of the Judge Advocates General mandate that this critical legal advice be independent. Command decisions are informed and evidentiary standards are applied at each stage of the process with the advice of a staff judge advocate, along with input from a prosecutor, a victim, and the accused. A critical component to our fight against sexual assault in the military has been our obligation to build trust and confidence in victims. We know that victims must be empowered at every stage of the process. Survivors must believe that their privacy can be protected and that they can regain a sense of control in their lives. Sexual assault is a personal violation, and victims must be heard without having the process itself further make them feel victimized. Victims must know that they have a say before any decision is made. Our Special Victims Council have become a vital teammate in our sexual assault prevention and response arsenal. Our work must continue to prevent and respond to criminal behavior within our ranks. Our next steps, I believe, should focus on addressing evolving issues of retaliation, collateral misconduct, timeliness, and education on the general deterrent effect generated by the cases tried. While there has been much progress, we as judge advocates remain committed to survivors of sexual assault. We remain committed to airmen, and we remain committed to providing sound, independent legal advice to our commanders in a military justice system that has made us the most ready, lethal, and disciplined force in the world. Thank you for hearing us today.
Thank you. Major General Lecce.
Madam Chair, Ranking Member Kelly, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. As fitting given the title of this hearing, I would like to focus on commanders. The ethos of the Marine Corps is every Marine a rifleman, and this ethos demands that every Marine officer be capable of leading Marines in combat, including judge advocates. I have been very privileged to have been selected for command both as a lieutenant colonel, as the commanding officer of Marine Security Guard Company in the Middle East, and as a colonel, as the commanding officer of Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. For Marines, and I believe the other service, the pinnacle of a career is serving as a commander. But with the mantle of command comes great responsibilities. Commanders are both responsible and accountable for the morale, welfare, and discipline of their unit. These are not just words, but the foundational tenet of life in the military. At the end of the day, a commander is responsible for preparing and leading his or her Marines into combat, where the cohesion and discipline of the unit may literally be the difference between life and death. When mothers and fathers of this nation send their sons and daughters to become Marines, we make a sacred promise that we will train their sons and daughters to the utmost of our ability, that we will protect their welfare, and if we must go into harm's way, these young men and women will be ready, mentally, physically, emotionally, to fight and win this nation's wars. As a commander, it is your obligation to be fully invested in the welfare of your Marines, to know each one of them, to employ them as a team, to treat them as a family that they are. You must be confident that if you are ordered into combat, your Marines go as a team, as a family. In the Marine Corps, you commit your adult life to preparing to becoming a commander, preparing so that you are ready to meet the highest of obligations and to ensure that you uphold the promise you made to the mother and fathers of your Marines. As the commanding officer of Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune, I was a general court-martial convening authority responsible for bringing charges in the most serious criminal cases, including sexual assault cases. Upon taking command, I trusted my staff judge advocate and my legal support teams to provide the advice I required to execute my duties, including my role as convening authority. But perhaps just as important to me was my equal opportunity advisor, because he helped me keep my finger on the pulse of the command. My equal opportunity advisor provided me invaluable counsel, keeping me connected to all echelons of the command, from assisting me in developing, administering, and interpreting and debriefing required command climate surveys, to highlighting areas of concern, to identify Marines who required individualized attention. My equal opportunity advisor helped me fulfill my obligation to know my Marines and look out for their welfare. My point is highlighting these facts is that although our judge advocates are highly trained and capable professionals, they are not commanders. They do not carry the responsibility and obligation to stay connected to their command, to build a team, to build a family. Commanders and commanders alone carry this responsibility. Judge advocates provide legal advice. To remove the commander from the military justice system robs the commander of a critical tool for ensuring discipline is enforced, welfare is assured, and justice is served. As the most senior commander in our Marine Corps, the Commandant has been intensely focused on improving our culture. Unequivocally, he has stated on countless occasions that one sexual assault is too many, retaliation is unacceptable, and that ostracism is antithetical to our warrior culture. To combat these destructive behaviors, the Commandant issued a Marine Corps order on prohibited activities and conduct. This order, published in June of 2018, criminalizes a wide spectrum of destructive behaviors, including sexual harassment, hazing, discrimination, retaliation, bullying, ostracism, as well as misconduct committed online or via social media. While the Commandant's efforts over the last years have positively reinforced a culture where sexual assault and retaliation are not tolerated, more remains to be done, and the Marine Corps is prepared to do it. In the Marine Corps, we never lose sight of the fact that our Marines are our greatest assets. We are obligated to ensure each Marine's welfare and to return our Marines to their loved ones and back to this great nation better for having served. Thank you once again for allowing me to testify. I look forward to working with you and answering your questions.
First, say how grateful we are for the service, for your long service in the military. You've each on one level or another expressed how you feel that one sexual assault is too many. But we have 15,000 of them a year. And as you know, only 5,000 of them report. And of those, maybe 500 go to a court-martial, and of those, only about 250 are convicted. You heard the testimony of these 3 victims. They were telling the truth. And yet, they were treated so poorly that the process was worse than the rape. I'd like to have each of you comment on what you heard from each of them. Lieutenant General, PD?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. It is a difficult thing to listen, and I respect the members of the first panel. It is an unfortunate, worse than that experience that they endured. And I think that is, frankly, ma'am, what motivates all of us. It has always motivated me as a professional, as an officer, as someone in law enforcement and the profession of law, to right the wrongs that we see.
So what would you do differently having heard their stories?
Ma'am, exactly. One, I would, and it is what we try and do every day, which is to, once reported, provide a level of care to them that provides a restorative process that gets them back where they need to be and then holds the right person accountable. So it's a robust, well-resourced, well-trained investigative process. And then from a prosecution and a defense standpoint, ma'am, as a very well-educated, resource-trained bar. That includes an extraordinary bar of special victim counsel now as well. So what we are trying to do is bring all of those resources to bear on the very cases that they bring to our attention.
Vice Admiral, is there anything that you would recommend based on what you heard from those victims?
Madam Chair, from Lieutenant Commander Elliott, my takeaway was that, as is reflected in the last military survey on investigations and the justice process, discretion really matters. And I think we have to be sure that we have people fully trained. The one commander that you mentioned that didn't keep discretion, I could see how hurtful that was in this circumstance. What we owe Lieutenant Commander Elliott and everybody like her is her story about the previous commanding officer, though, the one that supported her, as she called it, beyond the call of duty. And as General PD indicated, the Victims Legal Counsel program that she also indicated was a great support.
Lieutenant General Rockwell.
Madam Chair, as attorneys, we're process people. And because you're a process person, sometimes you lose empathy. And as you sit and listen to the victims as they go through this process, and this process of reporting through investigation, through adjudication, that gets you ultimately to accountability, it's easy to focus on the process and lose the fact that the empathy that you need to have for somebody walking through that process. You ask what we can do better. I think it's an integration. It's an integration with regard to as you walk through that process. We have a lot of people trying to help along the way. And as we look at how we integrate throughout that process, from what SARCs do, to what victim advocates do, to what investigators do, to what prosecutors, defenders, and special victims counsel do, there is methodologies to look at to better integrate that. That better integration gives you more speed, and I think it gives you empathy for a victim in a case, or for that matter, a witness in any case, who is actually the one walking through it.
All right. H. General Lecce, we're going to have to go and vote, and then we will return. But do you have a quick comment you'd like to make?
Ma'am, I can't speak as to why this happened to the survivors that testified.
No, but I mean, based on what you heard, I want to know if you've gleaned anything from it that you would take back and want to do differently.
Well, first of all, as I stated in my opening statement, commanders need to be held accountable. They're accountable for what happened to them. What
happened to that commander who was conflicted, who continued to handle the case? And now we have a West Point grad who we invested a lot of money in, who's no longer serving.
Ma'am, I can't speak to that specific case, but what I can say is there are systems in place to deal with these things. As the ranking member said, the IG, the Inspector General, we have a very robust practice. I'm not the IG, but I work very closely with him. For these retaliation and ostracism cases, by regulation, only the IG can handle a reprisal or retaliation case. I mean, that's one step. Echoing what General Rockwell said, we have professionalized our victim advocates, our victims legal counsel, our victim witness assistance program to be more robust and more supportive of victims along the way in the process.
All right. Thank you. We're going to return.